Hey guys, tonight we saddle up and ride under the stars of the Old West. The prairie stretches before you like a dark ocean, and your horse plods along the dusty trail, its hooves thudding a steady rhythm into the silence. A coyote howls in the distance. Your shirt sticks to your back with the sweat of the day, but the desert wind is cool now, and somewhere above the clouds a lonely moon watches over you. You're not just out here for cattle or coin. No, tonight we're chasing something more slippery, something quieter than a rattlesnake's hiss. We're asking, did cowboys know love? And if they did, who did they share it with? It's not a question many people stop to ask when watching the shootouts and standoffs of Hollywood westerns, but beneath the grit, grime, and bravado, cowboys were human, achingly so. They laughed, they cried, they broke things in hearts, and let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive 3 days on a cattle drive. Between the dysentery, the stampedes, and the brutal sun, love might be the least of your concerns. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from anywhere interesting, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love knowing who's out there on the trail with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ride past a mesquite tree, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. Up ahead, your camp is waiting. There's a fire already flickering. Someone beat you there. Maybe it's Red, the quiet one who always makes too much coffee. Or maybe it's Jack, who hasn't stopped talking about Miss Lillian from the dance in Santa Fe. Either way, you pull your hat lower, tilt your head toward the stars, and wonder what this night will bring. Campfires were more than just a place to warm up or boil beans. They were confessionals. Out here, far from towns and churches, cowboys whispered truths into the flames. You learn quickly that silence is golden, and stories, especially the soft ones, only surface when the moon is high and the coffee's burned just right. There's a reason cowboy tales start and end with the fire. You sit around it, boots off, passing a bottle of whiskey or a tin cup of that thick sludge Jack insists is coffee. And one by one, voices rise. You hear about a girl named Clara in Kansas who used to braid blue ribbons into her hair. About a young man in Dodge City who left with promises and returned with nothing but dust in his teeth. One cowboy, his name's Will, speaks so quietly you have to lean in. He talks about how he used to leave daisies outside a teacher's window every Sunday at dawn. She never said anything. One day he came by and saw a vase had been placed on the sill. That was enough for him. Historians still argue whether cowboys were truly lonely or if solitude was just part of the lifestyle. But the stories don't lie. They carry the ache of men who didn't always have the words, but always had the silence. You shift in your bedroll, the fire casting lazy shadows on your face. Your boots are stiff with trail dust, your shoulders sore from riding, and still your mind drifts back to that one time you saw the boss man, grizzled old Hank, quietly humming a lullaby by the chuck wagon, his eyes wet with memory. Cowboys didn't talk about feelings, not directly. But if you listened close, if you really listened, you'd hear it in their pauses, in the way they lingered on someone's name, in the way they looked at the stars, as if hoping someone somewhere was looking back. You're not even sure if what they felt could be called love in the big cinematic way. It was quieter, more raw. A longing, maybe, a wondering, the kind of emotion that slips between your ribs when the wind whistles through the canyon at night. Oh, and the jokes didn't stop either. Someone around the fire always had to lighten the mood. Usually it's Jeb, the one missing half his front tooth, who once fell in love with a mail-order bride photo. Except it turned out to be a sketch of Queen Victoria. Didn't stop him from writing 3 letters, though. Still, for every laugh, there's a pause, a look into the embers, a thumb tracing the edge of a worn letter. You realize that cowboy love was never loud. It was written in quiet moments, stolen glances, and goodbyes never said out loud. And tonight, as you close your eyes beside the fire, hat over your face, you wonder if someone, somewhere, is dreaming of you too. Maybe not by name, but by the rhythm of your boots, the scent of leather and smoke, the soft hush of your horse's breath. Out here, where the stars are 1,000 pinpricks of maybe, love isn't a fire. It's the faint warmth left after the last log has burned away. You wake with the scent of burnt beans in your nose and the crunch of dry grass under your back. Someone's stirring the fire, coaxing reluctant flames from glowing embers. The sky is just turning lavender, and the desert doesn't feel quite so cruel in the morning chill. Today, you ride with purpose, not just to move cattle, but because you're still chewing on something from last night's talk. That strange hush that settled after Will told his story. That glance Hank gave the fire like it was burning memories. You start to think love may not have been missing from a cowboy's life. It just looked different than the rest of the world expected. You start your day the way any cowboy does. Coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, bacon so crisp it could cut your gums, and a silence that only breaks when someone grumbles about saddle sores or last night's coyotes. You mount your horse and follow the others out, hooves kicking dust into the rising sun. And as the day stretches long and hot, you begin to understand the rhythm of it. Cowboy life wasn't built for poetry, but it had poetry anyway. In the creak of leather, in the slap of rope, in the call of distant cows. There was a code out here, a code of grit, resilience, and emotional tight-lipping. You didn't cry when your horse died. You didn't moan when your ribs ached. And you sure as hell didn't speak the word lonely out loud. But you felt it. The cowboy's day was all about motion. Round up the herd, brand the calves, fix the fence, rinse and repeat. But between the chores, your mind wandered to someone's voice, to a pair of eyes in a frontier town, to a letter you hadn't sent because what was the point? You think of Red, who's been riding with you for months now. He talks like he's never cared for anything in his life. But one evening, you saw him take out a little book of pressed flowers. He held it like it might shatter. Didn't say a word. Just flipped through it, page by page, then tucked it back into his saddlebag. Historians still argue whether cowboys were truly as emotionally distant as their reputation suggests, or if it was all performative, a mask, a survival mechanism. One thing certain, expressing affection wasn't part of the rancher's code. You could buy a woman a drink. You could share a tent with a friend, but saying what you felt, that was riskier than any bar fight. Still, you find the clues in the little things. Red sewing that flower into the lining of his hat. Hank writing the same line, "Hope the wind finds you well," in every journal entry. Jeb whistling the same tune every night before bed, one he once claimed he heard a girl humming in El Paso 10 years ago. Cowboys weren't heartless. They were just cautious, careful not to let too much of themselves show. The cattle didn't care if you had a sweetheart. The dust didn't care if your heart ached. But still, in the privacy of their bedrolls and between the saddle and sky, they thought about love. And you? You're starting to think that maybe the cowboy's love was just quieter. Not the kind you'd write poems about, but the kind that would make a man ride 50 miles out of his way just to see someone smile. The code wasn't all stoic silence. It also included fierce loyalty. A cowboy didn't talk much about his feelings, but he'd fight to the bone for someone he cared about. That, too, was a kind of love, not spoken, not sung, but felt. You recall how once, when a new guy named Elias joined your crew, he was quiet and green, the kind that usually washed out in a week. But one night, when his horse spooked and he tumbled into a creek, Hank, grumpy, tired, grizzled Hank, rode back in to pull him out. Didn't say a word about it, just grunted and rode on. But Elias never left the crew after that, and Hank? He started carrying an extra pair of gloves in his saddlebag. Some historians note that cowboy crews functioned like families, not just in labor, but in their emotional bonds. It wasn't just about the job. It was about watching each other's backs. You didn't say, "I love you." You handed someone the last strip of jerky when they looked too tired to ask. There's a fringe theory you once heard in a frontier museum that some cowboys wore rings, not to symbolize marriage, but brotherhood, bonds forged over hard miles and long nights. No documents, no ceremonies, just understanding. By sundown, you're back at camp. Your hands are raw from rope burn, your shoulders burn from the sun, but your heart, it's full. Not in the cinematic, slow-motion hug kind of way, more like a quiet fullness, like a worn saddle that fits just right, like boots molded to your feet. You sit by the fire again. Will's playing a soft tune on his harmonica. Jack is snoring already. And Red? He's whispering something into the night. You don't ask. You just listen. Out here, love doesn't shout. It rustles through the sagebrush. It lingers in the smoke. It rides beside you in the sound of hoofbeats and settles into your bones like the desert cold. The wind picks up sometime around midnight, tugging at your blanket and setting the prairie grass whispering. You roll over in your bedroll, eyes half closed, and catch a glimpse of the stars, still burning bright, stubborn as ever. And it hits you again. How many hearts have beat out here in the dust, in silence, under this exact sky? The next morning comes with no alarm, but the steady shuffle of boots and the distant lowing of cattle. Today's trail is long, hot, and winding. As you ride, your mind drifts, not to the fences that need mending or the herd that needs driving, but to the men riding beside you. You've heard them snore. You've seen them bleed. You've eaten beans with them every night for weeks. But what you're realizing now, as your horse picks its way over a shallow creek, is that the strongest connections out here aren't with the land or even with the job. They're with each other. Brothers of the saddle, they called it, and it's no exaggeration. Cowboys didn't have much. Most owned little more than the clothes on their back, their saddle, maybe a good horse if they were lucky. But they had each other. In this hard country, friendship wasn't a luxury. It was essential. You depended on the man riding next to you, sometimes for your life. There was the time, for instance, when Jeb got thrown from his horse into a thicket of mesquite. Didn't say a word, just lay there groaning, thorns like needles sticking out of his face. You, Red, and Jack rode back, pulled him out, patched him up. Later that night, he said nothing, just passed you the last of his tobacco. That was his thank you. And it wasn't just about saving each other from danger. It was knowing how someone takes their coffee without asking, knowing when to leave them alone, knowing when they need a laugh or a nudge or a distraction from whatever's eating at them. Historians often describe the cowboy code as an unwritten rule book, a moral compass stitched together from pride, survival, and loyalty. But between the lines of that code was affection, quiet, powerful, and enduring. There's a letter you once saw in an old museum in Arizona, dated 1876. A cowboy named Eli wrote to his pard, a fellow trail hand who had moved on to California. The letter was full of soft phrases. Miss your voice on the night watch. That fire don't warm me the same without you. And ride safe, always. The curators didn't comment on what kind of bond it was. They left it open. You like that. Because out here, names didn't matter as much as loyalty did. You start to wonder if friend was always a wide enough word. There's a fringe theory you heard once, told in hushed tones by a wrinkled old storyteller near Abilene, that some pairs of cowboys were closer than brothers. Tied at the soul, he called it. He said they carved matching marks into their rifles, said they always rode side by side, and when one died, the other buried him with his own hands, then rode on wearing the dead man's hat. Historians still argue whether such partnerships were purely brotherhood or something deeper. Romantic, maybe. Or maybe it didn't need to be labeled. Love, after all, wears many hats. You recall a dusty journal Red once let you peek into. Pages full of poems, some about horses, others about storms, but one that stood out read only, "I've ridden with many, but slept warmest beside you." No signature, just those lines, as raw and true as anything ever etched into saddle leather. And then there were the nicknames. Cowboys loved nicknames, often given with teasing affection. Slim, Dusty, Sarge, Beans. But some were gentler, like Sunshine, for a cowboy who always smiled. Or Sweetwater, for one who told the best stories. You'd hear those names whispered, never mocked, spoken like a soft tether to something fragile. The bond between trail mates could be so deep, it made parting near unbearable. You've seen grown men shake hands like they were losing a part of themselves, seen eyes shimmer behind weathered brows when it was time to ride in separate directions. One night, you remember, Will just stopped talking. He stared into the fire so long his coffee went cold. Finally, he said, 10 years. I rode with Ben. 10 years. We never missed a ride. Then one day he took a job down near El Paso. Said he'd send word. He never did. I still ride like he's behind me. There's a lump in your throat you pretend is from the smoke. Friendship like that isn't just survival. It's soul stuff. It's the glue that held cowboys together when the loneliness and the silence and the weight of unspoken things became too heavy to carry alone. At night, under a canopy of stars, sometimes you'd lie shoulder to shoulder, boots touching, no words, just the soft snort of horses nearby and the fire's last pops. You'd feel the presence of the man next to you like an anchor, not just a friend, a partner in the truest sense. And in the rare moments when someone laughed, really laughed, it lit the whole night up. Not because the joke was that funny, but because joy out here was precious. Shared laughter was a kind of love, too. So, as you brush the dust from your coat and sip your third cup of coffee, you realize this. Cowboys knew love. Not always romantic, not always spoken, but deep, raw, steadfast love, the kind that could only bloom between two souls who'd been through hell together and still looked out for each other like brothers. And as you drift toward sleep again, the fire warm on your boots, you think about the men riding with you, their quiet strength, their stories, their silences. In a world where everything was hard, they held on to each other. You ride with your hand tucked into your jacket, your fingers brushing against a soft edge of parchment. One of those letters you never quite sent. Maybe it was meant for Lillian, that school teacher in Santa Fe who once gave you an extra slice of pie without charging. Or maybe it was for your sister back home, the one you never wrote because you didn't want her to worry about how thin you've gotten. Either way, it stays folded, unread. You tell yourself you'll send it tomorrow. You won't. Letters were the cowboys' only tether to what some called a real life. Towns came and went like mirages. People, too. But a letter, that was different. A letter held weight. You could unfold it again and again, trace the loops of someone's handwriting, smell a faint hint of lavender or smoke or home. You remember the first time you watched Jack get a letter from a woman. He didn't open it right away, just held it in both hands like it was warm bread fresh from the oven. Later that night, when he thought no one was watching, he lit a match and burned it. No explanation, just ashes and a longer-than-usual silence. Historians still argue whether cowboy letters were mostly practical or emotional. After all, many were just quick updates. We're in Cheyenne. Cows are stubborn. Weather's mean. But the ones that survived? The ones we find in old trunks and attics and tucked into the covers of forgotten books? Those letters sing with longing. There's one you read once, unsigned, undated. It said simply, "I look for your face in every crowd, and I ride farther, hoping the road curves back to you." You suspect that writer never got an answer. Or maybe they did, but it wasn't what they wanted. Either way, the letter still breathes. You try not to romanticize it too much. The truth is, most cowboys couldn't write very well. Some couldn't read at all. That's where trail friends came in. Someone like Will, who'd write for you if you asked. He'd sit by the fire with a blunt pencil and scrawl out what you dictated. Tell her the wind's been cold. Tell her the nights are long. Tell her I ain't forgotten. One time, a drifter named Tobias joined your crew for a week. He had this weathered envelope, completely blank, no stamp, no name. Said it was a habit. He wrote one letter a month, always to the same person, but never mailed them. He kept them rolled in his bedroll like talismans. Better to say it than to choke on it, he told you, even if no one hears. There's something achingly modern about that, isn't there? Like posting into the void. Only this was ink and raw fingers, not comment sections and emojis. The trail gives you time to think, and with time comes memory. You remember the preacher's daughter in Wichita, the way she laughed like it surprised even her. You remember the widow who patched your shirt after a bar fight and asked nothing in return but your name. You gave her a fake one. Regret tastes like tin. You think of all the times you almost stayed. The porch you sat on with a woman who didn't ask about the road. The hand you almost reached for when the music stopped. The letter you wrote that still lives in your saddlebag untouched, yellowing like old corn husk. And still the road called louder. The cowboy's curse, maybe, was never knowing how to stop riding. Even when someone said, "You can stay." Even when the coffee was hot and the bed was warm and the eyes across the table said everything you ever wanted to hear. You weren't built for that kind of stillness. At least, that's what you told yourself. But it wasn't just about fear or wanderlust. Sometimes it was shame. Cowboys carried ghosts, regrets, histories too heavy for small-town porches. Who were they to walk into someone's life and stay? You think of Red again, the quiet one. He once said, "I don't go home. Ain't nothing there for me that I didn't ruin." Then he laughed like he'd meant it to be a joke. But you knew better. You always do, when you've been out here long enough. There's an open debate among historians about how deeply cowboys engaged with the idea of home. Were they fleeing something, or just chasing freedom? Or was it both? Freedom and fear, braided together like a well-used lasso. The trail doesn't offer answers, just dust and time and space to think. That night, as the fire crackles low, you take the letter from your coat pocket. You unfold it. It's messy, the ink smudged from sweat and the jostle of the trail. It starts with "Dear," but you never finish the name. Maybe it was Lillian. Maybe it was no one. Maybe it was you, writing to the version of yourself you keep trying to become. You fold it back up, not because you're scared, just because you're not ready. Love, for a cowboy, often lived in the unsent letter, in the what if, in the maybe next time. It wasn't always brave. It wasn't always clear. But it was real, in the way hope is real, when there's nothing left but stars and cattle and the road ahead. You reached the next town by late afternoon, sun high, skin cracked, and boots dusted in a color you stopped trying to name. The place is barely a town, just a general store, a church that's always locked, and one saloon with swinging doors that creak even when there's no wind. You tie your horse outside and glance at your reflection in the saloon window, red-eyed, sunburnt, halfway between man and myth. A local kid stares at you from across the road, wide-eyed, like you're something out of a dime novel. You tip your hat. He runs. Inside, the saloon smells like smoke, sweat, old wood, and desperation. Not necessarily in that order. This is where the illusion of cowboy love gets blurry. On the trail, love is a memory, a regret, a folded letter. In town, it's more fleeting, more like smoke rings and perfume and names you forget by morning. You saddle up to the bar, order a shot of something you can't pronounce. The barkeep gives you a once-over and pours generously. This ain't his first trail-weary cowboy. It won't be his last. In the corner, there's a card game already going. A few men you half recognize, cowboys from another crew. Their laughter's loud, not joyful, the kind that keeps sadness from crawling up your spine. A woman in a red dress leans on one of them, not smiling, just waiting, like a chore. Historians still argue whether these saloon scenes were romanticized or accurate. The truth, like most things, lies somewhere in between. Cowboys drank hard, laughed loud, and spent freely, but not always joyfully. Sometimes it was habit. Sometimes it was an attempt to feel something, anything other than tired. You sip slowly, the burn's familiar. Beside you, Red's already lost in a game of 5-card draw. Jack's flirting with a woman who's pretending to be interested. He'll end up alone, same as always. Cowboy towns weren't built for permanence. They were pit stops. places to forget, to misplace your name, to feel warm skin beside you, even if you wouldn't remember their voice tomorrow. Love here was transactional, often wrapped in silk and whiskey and quick goodbyes. Still, it wasn't always empty. You recall one night in Abilene. The rain had come hard, sudden, and the saloon was packed. You'd found yourself at a table across from a woman with tired eyes and a chipped tooth. She didn't flirt. She just asked if you liked poetry. You said no, and she laughed. Then recited something anyway. Something about stars and forgetting. You didn't leave with her. You just listened until the room emptied. You remember that night more than the ones that ended upstairs. Because sometimes, even in towns like this, connection flickered, not bright, not lasting, but real. There's a fringe anecdote told by a newspaper clipping collector in New Mexico. He claimed to have found dozens of small classified ads in 19th century papers left by cowboys trying to reconnect. To the woman with the blue shawl in Wichita, one read, "I rode north before I could say thank you, right to the Silver Post, care of GT. Another, "You sang to me in Miles City. I dreamt it again last night. If you remember me, leave a red ribbon on the chapel fence." Desperate, maybe. Romantic, absolutely. Proof that even the toughest men could ache? Undeniably. Historians argue whether these were genuine or just dramatizations. But again, the truth doesn't care what you believe. What matters is that someone wrote those words. Someone hoped they'd be read. Back in the saloon, someone starts playing piano. Rough, off-key, but it's enough. You find yourself tapping your boot in time. Red wins his hand and lets out a rare grin. Jack's still trying. The woman he's with is now lighting her own cigarette. She's bored. He hasn't noticed. You get up and step outside. The town's quieter than it should be. You look up at the sky. Pink streaks across a slowly deepening blue. You inhale. The air here always smells like it's pretending to be clean. You wander behind the saloon and find a small alley where the wind's trapped in a whirl. Someone's carved initials into the back wall, JR+EL. Probably long gone now, if they were ever real to begin with. You lean against the brick and pull out your canteen. The water's warm, but it clears your throat. You think about how many cowboys stood right here, tired, hopeful, regretful, maybe all three, maybe more. And then you hear it. Not a gunshot, not a shout, a song. Soft, almost drowned by the sound of hooves clopping down the road. A woman's voice inside the saloon singing something slow and sad. You don't catch the words, doesn't matter. The tone is enough. It wraps around your ribs, squeezes, and slips away. Love in a cowboy town isn't hearts and flowers. It's glances across crowded rooms. It's unfinished conversations. It's giving someone your only dry coat and pretending it wasn't a big deal. It's temporary tenderness in a world that eats softness for breakfast. You step back inside. The room's warmer now, or maybe you are. You order another drink, not to forget, just to feel the glass in your hand. And when Red offers to deal you in, you nod. Because out here, love shows up in odd ways. In shared silence. In split winnings. In watching someone's back during a bad hand. You won't remember most of this night. But maybe, just maybe, someone will. By the next morning, the saloon's gone quiet again, like nothing ever happened. The piano's shut, the smoke's cleared, and the woman who sang last night has vanished. Maybe off to the next town, maybe just back upstairs. You'll never know. You mount up without breakfast, boots still echoing with the rhythm of her voice. The trail stretches wide ahead, and as you ride, you wonder, were there any women the cowboys truly loved? Not the passing glances, not the quick kisses in back alleys, but love, real and rooted. The answer, like everything else out here, is complicated. You've heard stories, everyone has, about cowboys who fell for ranchers' daughters or prairie wives, about whirlwind romances that bloomed fast and burned hot, only to be swallowed by distance, war, or wandering hearts. One of the hands on your crew, Charlie, once told you about a girl he met in Amarillo. Said her name was June, had freckles like sunspots, and hands calloused from breaking horses. She wasn't soft. She was steel in a bonnet. They met when he was 20, talked for 2 weeks, and almost married. She knew how to tie knots, he'd say, grinning, and how to untie them with her smile. Then one morning, she was gone. No note, no explanation. He never saw her again. Cowboys didn't have much time for romance. The job demanded movement, months on the trail, dangerous work, the kind of schedule that kills letters, dries up courtships, and leaves a trail of half-remembered names behind. But still, love happened, just differently. You learn early that women of the frontier weren't background characters in this story. They were its backbone. Ranch wives who managed livestock while their husbands were away, school teachers who braved bandits and blizzards, saloon girls with pasts as tangled as any outlaws. Historians often skip over their stories or reduce them to stereotypes, the saintly wife, the sultry siren. But the truth? These women were tough as nails and twice as sharp. And when they loved, it was never half-hearted. You remember Miss Callie from over in Dodge, ran the post office with military precision. She had a voice that could silence a bar full of drunk miners and a laugh that could melt stone. Men tried to woo her. She outwitted them all. But there was one cowboy, Eli, who she'd pour coffee for without him asking. That was the tell. They say he wrote her a poem once, tied it to a raven's foot, and let it loose in the general direction of her window. Whether the bird ever made it, no one knows. What matters is that he tried. And there's the tale of Maria, the sharpshooter who toured with Wild West shows and could outdraw most men before finishing her tea. One cowboy followed her from county to county, carrying her name in every dusty town he passed. He never spoke to her again after they split in Kansas, but he refused to ride with anyone who bad-mouthed her. That, too, is a kind of devotion. Love, in cowboy country, was always colored by danger. It was a gamble, like poker in a storm. There were cattle stampedes, train robbers, fevers, injuries. You could lose a friend overnight. You could lose yourself in a ditch. So when cowboys loved someone, they often loved them hard, fast, and without promises. There's a fringed diary found in an old mining cabin that historians debate to this day. Written by a woman named Sadie, it chronicles her secret engagement to a cowboy named Luke. She writes about meeting him at church socials, sneaking notes and hymnals, and once sharing a kiss behind a haystack while her father loaded his rifle inside. They never married. The last entry reads, "Luke rode north with the cattle. I asked him not to. He said he'd return by spring. I still hang my ribbon on the fence each April. Historians can't find a trace of Luke. Some say he died. Others say he stayed north. But Sadie's fence still stands, the ribbon faded to near white. Even when love bloomed, it came with baggage. Cowboys were rarely husband material unless they gave up the trail, and not all were willing. Red told you once, "The only ring I ever wore was a bullet casing." You believed him. Still, there were exceptions. There's a story about Hank, the oldest hand on your crew. Quiet, gruff, didn't speak unless it was to criticize someone's rope work. But when he got drunk, which was rare, he'd whisper about Lillian, the woman he married once, briefly, long ago. She was a midwife, strong. He said she had miracle hands. They were together a year. Then he rode off on a job and never came back. "Not because I stopped loving her," he said, staring at the fire, "because I didn't know how to be still." That's the heart of it, isn't it? Stillness. Cowboys weren't made for it. They were built for motion, for distance. And sometimes love couldn't keep up. Yet, love endured, in its own way. In the mementos, stuffed in saddlebags. In the letters, never sent. In the way someone saved a piece of ribbon, or said a name in their sleep, or refused to ride with anyone who insulted a woman they hadn't seen in 10 years. Out here, love wasn't always happy, but it was honest. You stare at the horizon as you ride. The sun's dipping again. Another town behind you. Another story, half finished, trailing in your dust. You think of the women, the ones who stayed and the ones who didn't, the ones who said, "Come back," and the ones who knew better. And you wonder if any of them ever look west at sunset and think of a name just once, just quietly. If they do, you hope it's yours. The storm rolls in fast, prairie wind curling like a whip, lightning etching jagged cracks across the sky. You and the others are racing for shelter, hunched low over your saddles, eyes squinting through the sudden sheets of rain. It's loud, blinding, brutal, but you keep riding, because out here, you always keep riding. When the storm finally breaks and the world slows back to a dull, dripping hush, you find yourselves in a shallow ravine, horses snorting steam, men coughing the kind of cough that comes from deep inside tired lungs. Jack curses the sky. Red mutters something about his boots never drying again. You just sit down on a flat rock, soaked to the bone, staring at the steam rising from your coat like a ghost leaving your skin. And as the silence stretches, someone says it. Just one sentence, low and cracked. Sometimes I think I broke her heart. No one asks who. No one has to. Grief hangs heavy out here. Cowboys don't show it on their faces, but they carry it like bedrolls. Worn, muddy, always tied close. You've heard stories on long rides, quiet confessions passed like canteens. I had a kid once. I buried her ring in the desert. There's a porch back in Missouri I ain't sat on in 15 years. Love and sorrow rode side by side on the trail, not always caused by violence or betrayal, sometimes just the way life unfolded. A missed train, a wrong letter, a month that turned into a year. Historians often treat cowboys as myth, tough, stoic, disconnected from the tender parts of life. But the real men, the ones whose hands were blistered from reins and rope, they bled inside just as often as out. There's an old trail tale, part fact, part ghost story, about a cowboy named Jesse who lost his wife and newborn in a winter birth gone wrong. They say he kept riding north every winter after that, as if trying to catch up with the cold. One rider claimed he found Jesse sleeping in the snow, clutching a locket like it was the only warmth left in the world. They buried him under a pine, no grave marker, just a boot turned upside down on the fence post. Sometimes sorrow didn't come from losing someone. Sometimes it came from never having the courage to reach for them in the first place. Cowboys weren't trained to talk. They were trained to endure. That's what made it worse. You couldn't explain the pit in your chest or the dreams where a woman you barely knew said goodbye in slow motion. You just kept riding, hoping the ache would shake loose like a loose spur. Red, for example, quiet as a church pew. You'd never guess he once proposed, but he did, back in Oklahoma. Her name was Ruth. He bought the ring from a peddler and asked under an elm tree. She said yes. 2 weeks later, he lost his job, joined a trail crew, and convinced himself she deserved better. He left at dawn, never looked back, never stopped thinking about her either. He told you all this once, when he was drunk and the fire was low. The next morning, he denied every word, said he'd never even been to Oklahoma. But you knew. Historians still debate the emotional toll cowboy life took on the men who lived it. Was the silent strength, or was it damage? Did they bottle their sorrows out of pride, or because there was no room to grieve on a cattle drive? You don't know, but you know what it looks like. Red staring too long at empty desert. Jack laughing too loud when someone mentions weddings. You holding a letter that ends in "I miss you," but has no name at the top. There's a fringe theory among frontier folklorists that cowboys invented drifting, not just as a profession, but as a way to mourn without ceremony. That movement became a ritual of forgetting. If you kept going, you didn't have to feel the weight of what you left behind. But the trail has a memory. It brings sorrow back in flashes, a smell, a sound, a face in a crowd that resembles someone long gone. Once, in a mining town up in Montana, you swore you saw Clara. The way she walked, the way she held her hand to her hat when the wind picked up, it was her. But when she turned, it wasn't. Of course it wasn't. Still, it took you 3 days to stop thinking about it. Love lost doesn't vanish. It lingers, like the scent of sagebrush after rain, like the soreness in your legs after a long ride. Not sharp, not blinding, just always there. And sometimes it morphs into bitterness, into silence, into songs sung low over whiskey. Red once sang one, out of tune but with heart. She kissed me in the hallway. I left before the door. Now every step I'm taking is one I walked before. That song's never been recorded, never will be, but you remember it. You always will. Cowboys knew sorrow, deeply, quietly, with a dignity that sometimes looked like detachment, but was really just self-preservation. Tonight, the storm has passed. You dry your socks over the fire. Jack's snoring again. Red is silent, staring at his boots. And you? You fold that letter one more time. Maybe you'll send it tomorrow. Maybe. The sun rises slow and red over the canyon's edge. You're already up, brushing the dust off your coat, tightening the cinch, chewing yesterday's thoughts like stale tobacco. The others stir behind you, but today's ride feels different, not because of where you're headed, but because of who's riding beside you. You're not alone out here, never were. The history books love to paint cowboys as all white, all rugged, all the same. But the real trail, it's far more colorful, literally. Nearly 1 in 4 cowboys was black. Many more were Mexican vaqueros, native scouts, or of mixed heritage from a borderless, sprawling land. These riders lived the same rough lives, faced the same bitter winds, but with double the weight, carrying the burden of race along with the saddle. And just like their white counterparts, they loved, lost, and longed in ways the frontier didn't always understand. You ride today with Mateo. He doesn't say much, but when he does, it's either a joke sharp as a cactus spine or a phrase in Spanish that somehow sounds more poetic than the trail deserves. Mateo tells you of Esperanza. Her name means hope. She lived in a mission town, worked with her hands, and once slapped a sheriff for insulting her mother. She made the best tamales, he says, smiling like the memory warms his bones. I would have married her, but Mateo was a vaquero, and Esperanza's father didn't want her marrying a man who lived on a horse. He said love was fine, Mateo shrugs, but it doesn't feed a family. So he rode away, never wrote, never went back. But I still dream of her, he admits, always with flour on her hands. Then there's Isaiah, tall, quiet, and faster with a lasso than anyone you've ever seen. He's black, born free in Texas after the Civil War, raised by a mother who made him memorize Bible verses and songs about freedom. Isaiah doesn't talk about women much, but one night, over coffee and a stubborn campfire, he says, I loved a boy once. You don't say anything. Just keep stirring your coffee. He doesn't need your blessing, just your silence. It was in Abilene, Isaiah continues. We mucked stalls together. He played the fiddle. I kissed him once. That was enough. He says no more. That's the end of the story. But in that moment, you feel something shift. Because love out here isn't always about what you had. It's about what you risked to feel it, even once. Historians still argue whether frontier life allowed queer relationships to bloom or forced them underground. Some point to the all-male bunkhouses, the unusually intimate letters between trailmates, the quiet disappearances of certain partnerships into the wilderness. Others claim the danger of discovery made such relationships impossible. But out here, beneath the stars, you begin to wonder if freedom from cities and rules sometimes made room for love that didn't fit polite society. Mateo and Isaiah, and others like them, weren't just riding for pay. They were carving space for themselves in a land that didn't always want them, and love, in all its forms, was part of that defiance. You think back to an old trail cook named Moses, grizzled, missing a toe, and constantly humming. He once told you, I had a wife back in Georgia. She waited. I didn't go back. You asked why? He said, she deserved more than a man with ghosts in his boots. Love wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was sharp, complicated, heavy. Then there's Luta, a Lakota rider you met near the Missouri River. She wore her hair in braids, rode better than most men, and carried a rifle with a turquoise inlay. She said she rode not just for pay, but to stay close to the land of her grandmother's stories. Love? She once asked, laughing. I've had it and lost it, but the horse never leaves me at night. You never did figure out who she meant. A man? A woman? Someone between? It didn't matter. What mattered was how she looked at the sky when she spoke, as if even the stars remembered. A quirky detail. Many vaqueros carved their lovers' names into the handles of their lassos. A hidden intimacy, wrapped in rawhide. You once found one, Rosa, faintly scratched into a roping horn left at a deserted camp. No one talks about these things in the dime novels. They want drama, gunfights, and cattle rustlers. They want heroes and villains. But what if the real story, the one buried beneath all the dust, is about people trying to love in spite of everything? The trail doesn't discriminate in its hardship. Sore backs, broken hearts, freezing rain, they fall on everyone. But the world back then did discriminate in its judgment. Loving the wrong person or loving while brown or black often meant exile or worse. And yet they loved anyway. Isaiah still hums a fiddle tune sometimes. Mateo still says Esperanza's name like a prayer. Luta still stares at the stars like they're whispering old secrets. You ride between them all, listening, learning, realizing that love on the frontier was never simple, but always real. So when people ask if cowboys of color knew love, you can say this: they lived it in stolen moments, in silent glances, in songs hummed into the wind. They just didn't always get to keep it. The sun is high now, and the air smells like hot leather, old sweat, and creosote shrubs roasting under the sky. You shift in your saddle, watching dust kick up behind the other riders. Something about today's ride feels heavier, like there's a question you've carried too long without asking. Why were cowboys so emotionally shut off? You've heard it in their voices, short, tight, half-joking. You've seen it in their silences, in the way they stare at the fire like it might forgive them. And the more you ride, the more you start to realize it wasn't just the weather or the danger or the loneliness. It was the performance, the way masculinity out here had its own script, and love didn't always make the cut. You're living in a world where men sleep side by side but won't say, "I miss you," where the only acceptable way to cry is to blame it on the wind, where a cowboy might take a bullet before he says, "I'm scared." You start to see it everywhere. The silence after someone gets bad news in a letter. The way a man tightens his jaw when someone mentions the girl who used to braid his hair. Or the way two lifelong trail partners part ways without even shaking hands. Just a nod and a muttered, "See you around." Historians still argue whether this was social conditioning, survival strategy, or simple pride. Maybe it was all three. But out here, to show too much emotion was to risk losing your edge, and edge was often all that kept you alive. Still, it's not like cowboys didn't feel deeply. They just funneled it into other things. Ballads, boot carvings, poems scrawled in journals no one else ever read, or stories told under moonlight, half disguised as jokes. Take Charlie, the foreman you rode with last spring. He once told a funny tale about how a woman left him for a banker in Denver. He said it like a punchline, but he kept that banker's business card in his saddlebag, folded so many times it was almost dust. Or Slim, who'd lost his brother in a stampede accident. Never spoke of it directly, but he carved a perfect little steer into every bunk post he slept near. Quiet remembrance, quiet pain. You start to wonder, did these cowboys bottle things up to stay tough, or because no one ever showed them how to let it out? It wasn't just about not crying. It was about proving yourself every minute, being useful, stoic, hard to rattle. You fall off your horse, shake it off. Your girl marries someone else, write a song, keep moving. You're sick, keep riding. And what about tenderness? Could it even exist in a world this brittle? Turns out, yes, but you had to look closely. It wasn't always a kiss or a confession. Sometimes it was as small as a shared canteen, a bedroll passed over without a word, a saddle carefully oiled for someone else. There was one time you saw Hank, the grumpiest old cowboy in the outfit, wrap his coat around a younger rider shivering in the cold. Didn't say a word, just walked off into the dark like he didn't do anything at all. Another time, you watched two men hold hands for 1 second too long after surviving a flash flood. No one mentioned it. No one needed to. A quirky fact. Many cowboy songs, especially the old ones, are strangely tender, lullaby soft even. They sing to lost horses, to dying friends, to mothers, to lovers left behind. Underneath the rough drawl and twanging banjo, there's a surprising amount of heartbreak. And then there's the poetry. Bet you didn't know cowboys wrote it. Whole scrapbooks of it passed down or hidden in trunks. Lines like, "I lit my fire with the wind at my back, so no one could see me cry." That's not just tough talk. That's emotional strategy. That's survival in verse. But for all this hidden depth, masculinity on the range had rules, rules written in silence and sand. Don't talk too much. Don't get too close. Don't admit what you feel unless you can joke about it first. You remember a kid named Eli, fresh from Missouri, wide-eyed, all nerves. He talked too much, asked too many questions. "Do cowboys ever get scared?" he once asked the group. They laughed. Of course they laughed. But later that night, one of the older riders gave him a knife. "So you can stop asking and start surviving," he said. Eli never asked again, but he did keep the knife. And years later, when he left the range to become a preacher, he mailed that same knife back to the man who gave it to him. "Thanks for saving me," the note read, "even if I never got to say it." It's strange. You've seen men weep for dead horses, but not for dead friends. You've seen them carry lockets and never speak of who was inside. You've seen them pick fights over nothing just to bleed a little of what they're holding back. And somehow, through all this, you realize love did survive, just not in the forms you'd expect. It wasn't always romantic. It was sometimes fierce, protective, jealous, or stubborn, but it lived in every favor done without asking, in every whispered story told to the fire, in every scar shared like a secret handshake. You shift in your saddle again, watching the others ride. Mateo, Isaiah, Charlie. Maybe none of them will ever say they loved anyone, but you know they did. Because in this land of dust and silence, love isn't declared, it's endured. The fire crackles low, flickering gold against a wall of sleeping faces. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote yips and fades. You're lying on your side, boots still on, your hat pulled low, not for shade, but for privacy. Because tonight you're not sleeping. Neither is he. You hear his breathing just a few feet away, steady, familiar, the same rhythm you've heard every night on this cattle drive. You don't have to look. You already know it's Luke. Luke, who rides with one glove and hums when he's nervous. Luke, who caught your horse when it bucked, who stitched your arm with trembling fingers and a piece of fishing line. Luke, who never says much, but somehow always ends up beside you. And that's when it hits you. In this dust-choked world of unspoken rules, this closeness, this quiet watching, is what passes for intimacy. Cowboys might not say the word love, but they sure do practice it in other ways. a nudge during a storm, a coffee shared, a blanket loaned with no fuss. It's like learning to read a language without vowels, everything implied, nothing spelled out. See, out here, tenderness hides in the margins. It's in the way someone reins in just a little so you don't ride alone. It's a hand on your shoulder when you stare too long into the fire. It's offering the last piece of jerky without making it feel like charity. Historians still argue whether cowboys allowed themselves real emotional bonds or if they were just practical partnerships like mules yoked to the same load. But you've been out here long enough to know. Practicality doesn't explain everything. Take the time you busted your ankle in a gopher hole. You didn't ask for help. No cowboy would. But Ben doubled back without a word, took your saddle, carried you on his own horse for 2 days, didn't even tease you once, just kept whistling off key as if nothing unusual was happening. That's cowboy love. You remember Slim and Lenny, 2 riders who always set up camp next to each other, always, for 12 years. If one got hired, the other followed. If one got injured, the other stitched him up. They never explained it, never had to. When Lenny died in a flash flood, Slim just packed up his gear and walked off into the hills. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't come back. No funeral, just absence. You've come to understand that love for a cowboy is rarely loud. It's not flowers and poems and candlelight. It's fixing someone's cinch without being asked. It's remembering their coffee order. It's staying up through the night when they're sick and pretending in the morning that you just couldn't sleep. A quirky historical tidbit. Some cowboys had special partners, a term used in some early 20th century ranch logs. These weren't just bunk mates. They shared duties, wages, horses, and sometimes graves. Their tombstones, still scattered across forgotten plains, are carved side by side. Same year of death, same piece of land. Some say it was brotherhood. Some say it was more. But who are we to define the difference? That's the magic of the trail. It blurs lines. Out here, you live on instinct. You trust the man who guards your back. You sleep beside him in the rain. You whisper things you'd never say under a roof. And once in a while, you see 2 cowboys brush shoulders and linger just a beat too long. You see the firelight catch their eyes, soft and unsure. You hear them laugh too hard at each other's jokes. And you think, maybe, just maybe, there's a kind of love here that can't be boxed or named. It just is. There's a moment burned into your memory. A storm rolled in so fast the sky turned green. Horses bucked, tents tore loose, and in the chaos, you lost your footing. The wind screamed, the rain felt like pins, and then Luke's hand clamping onto yours. He didn't let go. Later, drenched and shaking, you sat under a tarp side by side and shared a flask in silence. You never talked about it, but since that day, something changed. Now when you ride, he checks your saddle. Now when you laugh, he watches. Now when the night comes down cold and heavy, he moves just a little closer. That's how tenderness works out here, like a secret handshake, like a song with no chorus. Even in letters, cowboys wrote sideways about affection. They'd talk about missing the smell of coffee on a certain someone's coat, or the sound of that one voice on quiet nights. Veiled words, but clear enough if you knew how to listen. And music? Oh, it's all over cowboy ballads. The ache of parting, the hope of return. There's one old verse that goes, I sleep beneath stars, but dream of a face that rode with me once, now lost without trace. Sounds like longing to you. Still, even with all this hidden softness, cowboys clung tight to the image of the strong, silent man, the Marlboro myth, even if it cost them closeness, even if it meant dying without ever saying what they felt. Because the truth is, many did. That's the price of pretending you're made of stone. You eventually crack. But you've learned better. You've seen the blanket passed without a word. You've felt the fire shared. You've watched Luke sleep, his hand unconsciously brushing toward you in the dark. You know that in a world this sharp and dry, tenderness isn't weakness. It's resistance. The trail stretches ahead, wide, empty, and oddly quiet this morning. You ride in silence, saddle leather creaking with every sway. There's a chill in the air, but it's not the cold that weighs on you. It's what you learned last night. Turns out Joe had a wife, back east, a whole family, and he never once mentioned them. That's the kind of thing that happens more often than you'd think out here. Cowboys with double lives, husbands who vanish west to find work and just never go back. Or maybe they do go back, but only for winter. Then spring rolls in, and the open land calls louder than a wedding ring, a life split clean down the middle. One part boots and branding irons, the other picnics and Sunday shoes. Historians still argue whether this duality was survival or selfishness. But for the men who lived it, it didn't feel like a choice. It was just how the cards fell. You remember a time at the chuck wagon, over a pot of beans and a sky full of stars, when Frank passed around a photo. It was cracked and faded, a woman holding a toddler, squinting into the sun. "My girls," he muttered, too soft for most to hear. You never saw the photo again. But maybe the more complicated stories were the ones you didn't see in photos. Because for some cowboys, the person they loved wasn't someone they could admit to. Not back then, not even to themselves. The frontier was a place where secrets stretched as far as the plains. If you were clever, you could live a whole life inside a lie, and maybe even be happy in it. But eventually, that lie would itch like a too-tight boot. Sooner or later, it had to come off. You knew a man named Travis who always kept to himself, laughed at the right jokes, played poker like a machine, never got too drunk, never chased the girls in town, just existed right at the edges of every story. Then one winter, while snowed in at a station, he got real quiet. One night, over a flask, he said, "Back in Abilene, I had a husband. We ran a boarding house. Folks thought we were just cousins." You sat there, stunned, not because of what he said, but because of how tired he looked saying it, like the weight of that truth had worn his spine thin. He wasn't ashamed, just worn out. That's the thing no one tells you about cowboy love stories. They aren't all sweet and daring. Some are quiet, some are desperate, some are so hidden they almost don't exist at all. A quirky detail? Some ranches in the late 1800s kept informal family logs. These were not legal documents, but diaries of who bunked with whom, who shared wages or land or horses. Some entries read like romantic pairings, even if they never used the word love. One log mentions two men who always cooked for each other, traded holiday gifts, and were never apart, even in illness. Sounds like a marriage to you. And then there were cowboys who were married to women they barely knew. Marriage for some was practical. A rancher needed heirs. A woman needed protection. Love, if it came at all, was an afterthought. One cowboy once said, "I married her because the roof leaked and she had a hammer." It worked, sort of. But for those who had deeper affections elsewhere, hidden behind glances and shared saddles, these marriages became masks, costumes worn for the Sunday socials, while the heart wandered back to the bunkhouse. Even women had double lives, though theirs were trickier. A few dressed as men and rode with cattle crews, unnoticed for years. Some records exist of two brothers who later turned out to be a married couple, both women. One obituary from 1902 even reads, "Loyal companions for 30 seasons on the trail, buried side by side at their request." You pause now, watching the sun crest the hills. Maybe this land didn't care who you loved. Maybe only people did. You think about Cal and Red. They rode together for 6 years, shared a tent, shared a dog, shared a garden plot when they finally settled. Everyone joked they were closer than blood. No one asked questions. When Red died, Cal didn't speak for a month, just sat on the porch, carving a small wooden horse every evening, like a ritual. Sometimes grief speaks louder than any confession. Modern historians dig through letters, journals, even payroll stubs to find traces of these relationships. Not because they want to label them, but because they existed. And truth, even uncomfortable truth, deserves daylight. You lean back in your saddle and think, if you'd been born then, could you have said what you needed to say? Or would you have ridden in silence too? There's something deeply human about wanting to be known, and something deeply cowboy about hiding it. That tension lives in every story you've heard. Cowboys who kissed the air when no one was watching, who wrote poems but signed them anonymous, who found love in the firelight but let it go at dawn. But still, it happened. Don't let the dust fool you. Behind every stoic face on a daguerreotype, there's a secret. Behind every smile in an old tin-type photo, maybe a hidden heartache. So next time you walk past a grave-marked friend or partner, or just two names on one stone, pause. Think about the lives they lived, not just the ones they admitted to. Because cowboys, they knew how to ride, how to rope, how to build fences and light fires in the rain. But they also knew love, even if they didn't always have the words for it. And sometimes the truest lives are the ones they didn't talk about at all. You ride with the morning fog curling low over the prairie like smoke, your horse's hooves muffled by damp earth. It's quiet, but not lonely. Someone's beside you, your partner for this stretch of trail. You've been riding together a while now. No words pass between you. None are needed. That's how it often was with cowboy duos, pairs, sidekicks, best friends, outlaws, partners. Whatever you called it, they rode together like two halves of one long shadow. And sometimes, just sometimes, that bond ran deeper than the law, deeper than the frontier, deeper than anyone dared admit. Think of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You've seen the movie, Paul Newman, Robert Redford, the ultimate buddy western. But the real men? Historians still argue whether they were just partners in crime or something more. They lived together, worked together, fled to South America together. That's a lot of togetherness, even for two guys on the run. Some say it was just camaraderie forged in gun smoke and gold heists. Others point to the letters they sent, the quiet way they always defended each other, the refusal to split even when it would have been safer. Maybe we'll never know the full truth, But then again, that's part of the legend. Then there's Bass Reeves and his loyal tracker, Sam. Bass, the real-life inspiration for the Lone Ranger, was a formerly enslaved man turned U.S. Marshal, one of the toughest lawmen the West ever saw. And Sam? He rode with Bass for years, braving gunfire in swamps, staying by his side through it all. Their friendship was so close, townsfolk assumed they were kin. But no one really knew much about Sam. He never married, rarely spoke. When Bass died, Sam vanished. Some say he walked into the woods and never came back. That's how the West works. Stories fade fast, especially the ones no one wants written down. And yet, across diaries and dusty photo albums, you start noticing a pattern. Two names always appearing together, sharing lodgings, buying supplies in pairs, getting arrested together, being buried side by side. A quirky detail? In several Old West cemeteries, you'll find graves labeled not husband and wife, but devoted friends, with carved inscriptions like "Together in life and death." It raises eyebrows and questions. You ride past a rocky bluff and remember a tale from a forgotten town. Two cowboys who ran a general store together. Everyone in town called them the boys. Though they were both in their 50s, they weren't blood, they weren't cousins. But one wore the other's wedding ring around his neck, under his shirt. No one ever asked why. Maybe because everyone already knew. The line between partnership and love on the frontier? Blurry. And maybe it wasn't even a line, just a stretch of open range where affection ran silent, unseen, but deeply felt. Historians still debate how many of these cowboy duos were romantic. Back then, there were no words like gay or queer in the way we use them now. No labels, just living. You didn't write, "I love him." You said, "We've been riding together going on 10 winters." You didn't call someone your soulmate. You said, "Ain't been right since he passed." Because in the West, vulnerability was dangerous. You could get thrown from a horse, bitten by a rattler, shot over a poker game, but nothing hurt like letting someone see the soft part of you. Still, cowboys found ways to express it in little moments. Sharing a can of peaches without a word. Fixing the other's saddle just right. Sleeping back to back for warmth, and maybe not needing warmth at all. There's an old story about two bank robbers who were caught in Kansas in the 1880s. When one was sentenced to hang, the other confessed to the crime, hoping to take his place. The judge didn't believe him. Said, "You'd lie for a thief?" The man said, "For him, I'd do worse." That's not just friendship. That's devotion. You ride on, clouds breaking above like a sky-sized promise. The kind you don't say out loud. The kind you just keep. There's also the famous case of Charlie Parkhurst, a stagecoach driver with a rough temper and a perfect aim. Charlie smoked cigars, cursed like a sailor, drank everyone under the table, and after death was revealed to be biologically female. Lived as a man for decades, ran with cowboys, gambled, fought, loved. That part remains a mystery. But you wonder what private connections Charlie made that the world never saw. Who knew? Who kept the secret? Who maybe shared it? That's the thing about these old pairings. They leave room for your imagination, for gentle speculation, because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones with no proof. Just a lingering sense that two people needed each other more than most. And maybe love in the West didn't look like flowers and poetry. Maybe it looked like riding into a gunfight because you promised you would. Like stitching up someone's wounds without asking what happened. Like never riding out without the other. Outlaws, lawmen, herders, gamblers, they all had their companions. Some of them had names history remembered, others didn't. But when you find two boots pointed toward each other by a long-dead fire pit, it's hard not to wonder what kind of stories they whispered in the dark. So next time you think of the cowboy, picture him not just as a lone rider disappearing into the sunset. Picture two hats side by side, two horses always tied to the same post, two lives tightly wound in dust, danger, and something tender that no one dared name. Because in the end, even outlaws need someone who'll ride with them to the very edge of the map, and maybe beyond. You ride alone now, just you, your horse, and the rhythmic creak of the saddle. The wind moves through the grass in long sighs. There's a stillness in your bones that isn't peace. It's something closer to resignation. A feeling cowboys knew better than most. Loneliness, not as a phase, but as a way of life. Out here, the sky never ends, and neither does the road. You follow cattle paths, riverbanks, abandoned wagon trails, but what you're really chasing is movement itself. Because standing still means facing the silence. And the silence? That's when you hear the ghosts. There's a romantic idea people have about solitude, like it's peaceful, poetic, meditative. But cowboy loneliness wasn't a stylized Instagram kind of quiet. It was deep, long-haul isolation, weeks between towns, no letters, no family, sometimes no names. Just you and the herd, your hat brim low, eyes always scanning for rustlers, storms, or worse, memories. Historians still argue whether most cowboys chose this life or fell into it. Some were younger sons with no inheritance. Others were freedmen with limited options. A few ran from things, jail, heartbreak, reputation. What they all shared, though, was detachment. You didn't get too close, didn't ask too many questions, didn't stay anywhere long enough for someone to remember your face. The job required it. A man on the trail had to stay sharp. Too much time thinking about the girl back home or the friend who didn't make it through winter, and you'd lose your edge, or worse, your nerve. And so, cowboys filled the gaps in strange ways. Some talked to their horses, others sang to the stars. A few carved little names into tree bark, just to prove they existed. One odd but telling habit. Many carried mirrors, tiny ones, not for grooming. There wasn't much you could do about that. But for looking at themselves, a reminder, I'm still here. I haven't disappeared. There's an old cowboy song with the line, I sleep under stars with no fire to light, just my shadow for company through the long, lonesome night. That wasn't poetic license. That was Tuesday, and it wasn't just the nights. Daytime could be worse, riding in silence behind the herd, dust coating your face, hat pulled low, nobody speaking for hours. The only voices were in your own head, and they weren't always kind. You remember one cowboy's journal where he wrote, "The cattle speak more than my crew. The dog looks at me more lovingly than any woman." He wasn't trying to be funny. He was describing a mental state, drifting, invisible, essential to the job, but disconnected from the world. A quirky, historical tidbit. Some cowboys gave themselves new names every time they crossed into a different county. Not aliases for crimes, just fresh starts. Maybe loneliness gets easier when you stop being someone fixed. When you blur around the edges and become part of the land. The strangest part? Cowboys got used to it, craved it. When a man spent too long in town, he'd start to fidget. Noise bothered him. Crowds felt suffocating. He couldn't explain it, but the openness, the space to vanish, felt like home. You can't miss people when you've trained yourself not to need them. But don't let that fool you into thinking it didn't hurt. Cowboys hid their longing under humor, grit, and whiskey. They teased each other about being soft, made jokes about going cow crazy if someone got too talkative. But deep down, most carried some heartbreak, someone they couldn't forget, a family they'd outlived, a friend buried under a stone with no name. Some tried to fix it. A few married, settled down, bought land. But even those stories often ended with the cowboy riding off again, unable to stay put. The solitude wasn't just in their circumstances, it had become their nature. One tragic example, a cowboy named Lewis, known for singing lullabies to his horse at night. Everyone thought he was a harmless eccentric. Then one winter, snowed in at a line camp, he went days without firewood. When they found him, he was frozen beside the horse, arms slung over its neck, both eyes wide open. No letter, no note, just a harmonica clutched in one hand and his boot pointing west, like he was still headed somewhere. Historians still argue whether cowboy loneliness was a necessary evil or the price of freedom. Some see it as noble suffering, others as needless, macho self-denial. The truth might be both. Cowboys had open skies but closed hearts. They knew every bird call but forgot the sound of their own laughter. And yet, loneliness wasn't always tragic. Sometimes it brought clarity. You could hear your own breath, feel the wind as something sacred. You started to believe in omens. You respected silence. And every now and then, someone would come along. Another cowboy, a stranger, a child asking for help. And the loneliness cracked just enough to let a little humanity shine through. You ride now past a weather-beaten cross stuck in the dirt. No name, just a cowboy hat hanging off one side. Someone left it there. Someone remembered. That's all most cowboys hoped for. So yes, they knew loneliness. Intimately. It was their saddle partner, their shadow, their oldest companion. But in that quiet ache, in those wide, empty landscapes, they found a strange kind of love. Not always for another person, but for the space to feel something without interruption. And maybe that's a kind of romance, too. The commitment to live fully in a world that doesn't notice you and still choose to ride on. You stop your horse by a crooked fence post where someone scratched a tune into the wood. Just the first few notes of a melody, worn shallow by rain and wind. You hum it, and the air carries it like a secret down the open plain. That's the thing about cowboys. If they couldn't say what they felt, they sang it instead. Cowboy songs weren't just entertainment. They were lifelines. You had miles of empty silence and only your voice, your horse, and the coyotes for company. Singing gave rhythm to the ride. It made the wind feel like a companion. It gave the cattle something to follow, and gave your heart something to hold on to. Take Red River Valley. You know the one. A slow, sad tune about someone leaving and someone being left. It doesn't say whether the two were lovers or if one just cared a little too much. But the ache in the song, that soft pain like someone's pressing gently on an old bruise, that's unmistakably about love, or the absence of it, Historians still argue whether these old ballads were based on real people or stitched together from scraps of longing. Either way, they spread across the West like wildfire, camp to camp, bunkhouse to bunkhouse. Each cowboy added his twist, maybe a new verse, a sly joke, a darker ending. And not all of them were sad. Some were downright rowdy. You had cheeky little numbers like I Ride an Old Paint, where the horse is your best friend and the girl back in Cheyenne still owes you $5. Or Whoopee-Tee-Yee-Yo, Get Along Little Doggies, which sounds like a lullaby, but hides a sneaky wink to the hard life of hurting and heartbreak. These songs weren't always sung well. Most cowboys couldn't carry a tune in a saddlebag, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling. You sang because it filled the dark, because it kept the wolves back, real or metaphorical. Some tunes weren't even in English. Mexican vaqueros brought corridos, narrative ballads about love, betrayal, revenge. Black cowboys sang spirituals, blues-rooted laments with gospel fire beneath them. Native cowhands added drum patterns and chants. The frontier wasn't a one-language place, and the music proved it. And let's not forget the fiddle, or the banjo, or that one cowboy who always carried spoons and insisted on being the rhythm section whether you wanted it or not. Music made the bunkhouse bearable. After 14-hour trail days, the guys who could sing became stars, even if their only stage was an overturned feed bucket. But behind the twang and pluck, behind the jokes about whiskey and horses and girls who done run off, there was something raw. These were love stories, not just for people, sometimes for a place, a time, a version of yourself that only existed in that dust-choked glow of sunset. One lesser-known cowboy tune, The Dying Cowboy, tells the story of a young man asking to be buried on the prairie, wrapped in his saddle, with his gun by his side. It's a romanticized death, yes, but what sticks is the loneliness. His last wish is not for family or even a woman, but for the land, for the trail. That's where he knew love, however twisted it might have been. Quirky fact? Some cowboys wrote songs but never sang them. They scribbled lyrics in margins of cattle ledgers, on the backs of wanted posters, or into the dirt with a stick. Temporary art, emotional graffiti. The frontier was littered with feelings that never got heard, and yet some survived, passed down, mutated. One cowboy's heartbreak became another's lullaby. One man's regret was another's inside joke. Music gave shape to what couldn't be said out loud, and cowboy culture was famously tight-lipped. There were tunes about best friends, lost brothers, maybe even lovers whose names were changed to keep things vague. You can't help but wonder when a song says, "my partner," what kind of partner they meant. Historians still debate that. Some say it was always platonic. Others point to suspiciously intimate lyrics, hidden like fence wires under sagebrush. But it didn't matter, really. The songs weren't confessions. They were shields. You could pour everything into a melody, and no one could accuse you of weakness. Just singing the old trail tunes, you'd say, even if your voice cracked on the high notes. You ride past a town now, long abandoned. The saloon sign hangs askew. A music note is still carved into the doorframe, proof that someone once filled this dusty space with sound. Maybe with joy, maybe with longing, probably both. There's a reason cowboy movies always end with a song, not a speech, not a kiss, a song. Because When the words give out, when the dust settles and all you got left is that quiet ache behind your ribs, a tune can say what language won't. So yes, they knew love, and they left behind its echo, wrapped in lyrics, strummed into night air, hummed softly beside sleeping cattle. And that echo rides with you now, as you pick up the tune again, without knowing quite why. You hum not because you're happy, not because you're sad, but because you're human, because that's what cowboys did when their hearts got too full and the trail was too long. You find yourself at the trail's end, the stars have thinned, and morning edges over the horizon in soft streaks of gray and rose. Your horse is tired. So are you. But there's a strange peace settling in your chest, like you've finally asked all the questions that needed asking, even if the answers rode off long before dawn. All this time, you've been wondering, did cowboys truly know love? And now, looking back across the miles you've traveled, the lives you've brushed against, the stories whispered beside firelight or sung to no one at all, you're starting to see it differently. Love didn't always look like it does in the movies. It didn't wear a white dress or ride in with trumpets. Sometimes it was just a hand on a shoulder, a letter you kept in your coat for 10 years, a shared smoke, a joke that only two people ever understood. You think of those ranchers who went 30 years without remarrying after their wives died, of the drifters who visited the same saloon every spring just to glimpse a certain face again, of the bunkhouse friends who always slept back to back for warmth, saying nothing about how that habit started, of the outlaw duos who rode together longer than most husbands and wives stayed married. Historians still argue whether cowboys had time for love, whether their lifestyle left any room for softness. Some point to diaries filled with longing. Others find only payroll ledgers and livestock counts. The evidence is patchy, like hoof prints in hard dirt. But you know this, they craved connection. They mourned. They hoped. They carried loss in silence. That's love, even if it never made it into a wedding photo. One peculiar story sticks with you. A cowboy in Montana who, when he died, was buried with a locket. No one knew who was inside, not his trail mates, not the woman who kept his room. Just a smile etched in old silver. That's all. But it meant enough to ride with him into the afterlife. And what about the ones who never settled down? Who chose solitude not because they didn't love, but because they loved too deeply to risk loss again? The desert is full of those ghosts, lone riders, chasing something they couldn't name, hearts full of unfinished songs. There's love in that, too. Even in the silence, especially in the silence, cowboys found a way to feel. Maybe not in big declarations, maybe not in roses and sonnets, but in the way they patched a friend's coat, or waited an extra day on the trail so a slower rider could catch up, or sang the same song every night, even after the person who loved it had long gone. Love didn't always shout. Sometimes it just stayed. You step off your horse now, loosen the saddle, let the animal breathe. The prairie is quiet, just the wind in the scrub, and a few birds testing their morning voices. You crouch, trace a finger through the dust. You think about all the hearts that beat out here unnoticed, all the feelings no one wrote down, all the ways people tried and sometimes failed to say, "I care about you," without ever using those exact words. Maybe that's the heart of it. Cowboys did know love. They just didn't always speak its language the way we expect. They knew the love of friends who became family, of animals they'd risk their lives for, of wide skies that held every dream they couldn't name, and yes, of people, real, complicated, sometimes unreachable people. So now, the next time you hear that soft whistle of wind through mesquite, or the fading hum of a cowboy tune drifting through a museum speaker, remember, you're hearing a love story, one that survived bullets and dust storms and the silence of history, one that still rides with us, quietly. And now, as the story fades and the campfire embers cool to a dim red glow, your breath slows. The trail is behind you. The saddle's been lifted from your shoulders. The horses are resting, and so should you. You've wandered far tonight, not just across the dusty plains of the American West, but through hearts that beat quietly beneath wide-brimmed hats. You've glimpsed the tenderness behind the toughness, the longing behind the silence. Cowboys didn't need to say, "I love you" out loud. They showed it in the way they rode back for a friend, or sang the same lullaby for a frightened herd, or looked at the stars with the same ache you feel now. It's okay not to have every answer. History, like the prairie, holds secrets. Some truths drift just out of reach. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between questions, you find what you're looking for. So let it go now. Let the reins fall. Let your mind quiet. The dust settles. The fire softens. The coyotes hush. The cowboy rides on. And you drift. You breathe. You sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.